ってきた。危ない。
Hello everyone. For the first time, I've gathered the courage to share my story publicly. It's very difficult for me to tell because it's an eternal pain, and in a moment, you'll understand what I mean. But perhaps by sharing this, I can stop someone from doing what I did, the biggest mistake of my life. I don't want to say my name, but I've been a truck driver since I was 19. My father did the same job all his life, and from a young age, I grew to love it too. In my first 4 years as a trucker, I suffered 3 armed robberies on the road. One of those times, I barely made it out alive. I heard the criminals saying to each other that they needed to kill me and make me disappear because I had seen their faces. I begged them not to, told them they could take everything, even my truck, but to let me go. By what felt like a miracle, they spared my life, but left me in a remote, wooded area. It was pitch dark since it was the early morning. They took my truck, the cargo, and all my belongings. Tired of this happening to me, and with no authorities truly doing their job, I chose a darker path. When I turned 27, without saying a single word to my wife, she was pregnant, and I didn't want to worry her, nor to any of my family or friends. I decided to visit a sorcerer in my community. I asked him for protection while I traveled, so that no one could harm me, or if they tried, something bad would happen to them instead. This man helped me, in quotation marks. He told me I would have to make a pact and an offering to Satan, something that would truly please him. At that moment, he didn't tell me what exactly, only that if I agreed, I would never again have problems of that kind. I would always be protected, and if someone wanted to harm me, they would meet a terrible end. So I accepted. We carried out a very dark ritual, I must say, and he also charged me a large sum of money. But at that moment, I didn't care about anything except my safety. I had to be well for my son who was on the way. The last thing I wanted was to leave my wife alone with the baby if something happened to me. Months passed, and everything went well at work. I made long trips on different highways across the country, and I had no problems, until one night, while traveling on a border highway, a truck with armed men stopped me. They pulled me out of the trailer and locked me in the cargo box with my hands and feet tied. Then I felt the truck start moving. I didn't know where they were taking me or what they were going to do. I was trembling with fear. Truly, it was terrifying because you don't know if that will be your last moment of life. I didn't even remember the pact I had made. I was only thinking about surviving, about them letting me go so I could see my wife again and watch my son be born. I lay there in the darkness of the box, crying, with no hope at all, when suddenly I felt a very strong jolt. The whole truck shook, and outside I heard something heavy crashing down. Then there was silence. The truck was tilted, and I knew an accident had happened, but I didn't know exactly what. That's when I began to feel it. A presence. A very heavy presence. My body turned ice cold, even though I was drenched in sweat from being trapped there without air. I had chills, and my whole body trembled non-stop. It was truly horrible, an indescribable sensation. Suddenly, I realized my hands and feet were untied. I had no idea how it happened. The first thing I did was stand up and, as best I could, walk to the cargo doors to bang on them and call for help. Within minutes, I heard a car approaching. It was a family who came to help me. They opened the doors, and I was finally able to get out of that hell. When I stepped out, I walked toward the front because I wanted to see what had happened. It turned out that, for some reason, the truck had gone off the road. The front part of the truck had separated from the cargo box and fallen into a ravine, where the men in front were left with their bodies destroyed at the bottom. The rear part, where I had been, got stuck between some trees that had grown horizontally in that spot. I survived. All my family and friends said it was a miracle, but I knew it wasn't. It was far from a miracle. I was scared, but at the same time, grateful to still be alive and without a scratch. I stopped working for a few months because I was still so shaken. During that time, my baby was born, the being I have loved most in my entire life. Throughout my wife's pregnancy, doctors said the baby was perfectly healthy and in excellent condition. We were able to pay for a private hospital so he could receive the best care when he was born. But if for some reason that not even the doctors could explain, my baby was born without life. That precious thing was the price that damn demonic being took from me in exchange for protecting me. It was my son. No one knew what had happened. Even hours before my baby's birth, doctors said everything was fine, he was moving, everything was perfect. But from one moment to the next, my child was silent, lifeless. I was destroyed. I fell into alcohol, and I even thought about ending my own life on several occasions, because the guilt doesn't let me sleep. Eventually, the guilt didn't let me hide the truth from my wife. Of course, she left me, and to this day, I haven't seen her again. The hell I've lived since then is unnecessary to describe, but I hope I've changed the mind of someone who might be considering making a pact with a dark being. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Have a good life. Thank you for your time. Good evening, Prater. My name is Liam Parker. I'm originally from Texas. Currently, I work in the buying and selling of cars, but for 6 years of my life, I was a truck driver. During that time, many things happened to me that could be considered paranormal, but I want to tell you about the one that left me the most shocked. I still remember it as if it had happened yesterday. I was driving my truck on a long route. I had already been behind the wheel for several hours when night fell. I want to make it clear that I wasn't tired or sleepy. In fact, I had slept very well and still felt full of energy. I was never the type to risk driving when tired. I always made sure I was well rested before starting long trips. Anyway, I was driving at night, with the radio playing softly, and the road was very quiet. There were no cars ahead of me or behind me. I was going at a normal speed for a loaded truck when, all of a sudden, I saw some very large lights far ahead, directly in my lane. Maybe it was another truck coming from the opposite direction, but I became very worried. That road was only one way. I flashed my lights at them to signal they were going in the wrong direction, hoping they'd slow down and pull over. But I saw that this vehicle wasn't stopping, it kept coming at high speed. It was moving so fast that, for me, braking in time was impossible, and in those seconds, I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. In that brief instant, I knew I might lose my life in a matter of seconds. It was the most intense moment I had ever experienced. I saw the lights of this truck right in front of me as it blared its horn. I closed my eyes, bracing for the crash, knowing there was nothing I could do to avoid it. But nothing happened. I opened my eyes, and there was absolutely no one in front of me, and no one behind me. The road was completely empty and dark, without a single trace of another truck or any vehicle at all. I gripped the steering wheel again. I had lost my composure for a moment when it happened, and my breathing was fast, my heart pounding. The only thing I could do was cry. I was in shock. I had no idea what had just happened. I swear on my life I didn't dream it, and I certainly didn't make it up. It truly happened to me, and I can't explain how or why. There's no logical explanation, because there isn't one. My brother-in-law, whenever we talk about this, says maybe I entered another reality. He claims that on highways, it's more common for portals to open, and maybe I entered and exited one very quickly. Others close to me say it could have been the spirit of a trucker who died there, a soul that doesn't realize it's no longer in this world and keeps driving endlessly. I don't know. Honestly, both theories sound far-fetched, but what happened to me was even stranger, so I can't rule them out. You're free to share your opinion about my case. I'd like to hear what you think. What really happened that night? My name is Emily Brooks. I have a very intense story that happened to my grandfather, and I want to share it with you. My grandfather is no longer with us, but we still remember him through all the stories he left behind from his time as a truck driver. This happened in the 1981s. He was working, transporting fruit to the country's northern border. He said that back then, the roads were quite peaceful. He never had any problems with anyone, and he never drove with the fear of criminals stopping him, unlike the kind of things that happen today. That night, he said he saw 3 young people hitchhiking, 2 men and 1 woman. He stopped immediately because at that time it was very common for people to ask for rides on the highway. He pulled over next to the young people and asked them where they were headed. They said they wanted to get to a border city, which happened to be the same destination my grandfather was going to. Without hesitation, he told them to hop in and that he'd take them there. At first, he didn't notice that the young people were covered in dirt. Their clothes were very dirty and the young woman was quite disheveled, but he didn't consider it any of his business. He also noticed they were carrying a black bag, which seemed to contain tools, because with the truck's movement, he could hear metal clanging inside. He said the 3 of them sat in complete silence. My grandfather was a very talkative man, but no matter how much he tried to make conversation or ask where they were coming from, they never answered. Their faces showed nothing but seriousness, no expression at all. 2 hours of the trip remained, and my grandfather was already very uncomfortable with these silent passengers who didn't even speak to each other. Still, he had committed to taking them to the city, so he endured it. When they finally arrived, one of them told my grandfather to drop them off at any gas station, saying they would use the payphone to call someone to pick them up. My grandfather stopped at the first gas station he saw as they entered the city. They didn't even thank him, they simply got out as if nothing had happened and shut the truck door without a word. Days passed, and my grandfather hit the road again for another long trip, passing through 3 different cities. He said that just after nightfall, while driving, he saw a young man standing by the side of the road. He wasn't hitchhiking, just standing there, looking directly at my grandfather's truck. My grandfather slowed down in case the young man needed a ride or help, but he didn't. My grandfather passed right next to him, almost crawling, and they made eye contact for a few seconds. The young man made no gesture to indicate he needed anything. It struck my grandfather as strange, but he continued on. About 2 hours later, he saw the same young man again on the side of the road, in the same position, staring at him. He couldn't believe it. He slowed down again, though not as much, just enough to get a good look and confirm it was indeed the same young man. And it was the exact same face, the same stare, following my grandfather with his eyes. A chill ran through him. It seemed impossible that this young man could appear again so many kilometers ahead from where he had first seen him, especially since my grandfather had taken many turns and wasn't driving on a single straight road. But the worst part came when, just before reaching the city, he saw him yet again. This time, instead of slowing down, my grandfather sped up. An unexplainable fear came over him, and all he wanted was to reach the city, unload the truck, and wait for daylight before continuing. That's exactly what he did. Early the next morning, he finished his work and returned home before nightfall. Weeks later, he was at home with my grandmother, watching the morning news. Suddenly, he saw some familiar faces on the screen. They were 3 young people who had been arrested. He turned up the volume to hear what the news anchor was saying. That's when he recognized them, the same 3 young people he had given a ride to that night. The news reported that they had turned themselves into the authorities, confessing that they had buried a friend of theirs completely alive while performing a satanic ritual. My grandfather was stunned. He realized it was likely he had picked them up right after they had done it, which explained why they were covered in dirt and so silent. But that wasn't what shocked him the most. What left him speechless was when the news showed a photo of the young man they had buried, who had been missing for weeks. It was the same young man my grandfather had seen 3 times on the road, staring at him as if trying to tell him something, though at the time, my grandfather didn't understand, because he had no idea the man was no longer alive. The report went on to say that the young killers had led authorities to the exact location where they had buried the victim. His body was recovered and returned to his family after the proper legal procedures. It was a huge news story at the time. Things like that didn't happen every day. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, carried some guilt over the incident. But he couldn't have known what those young people had done. He was simply offering help, as he always did for hitchhikers. And as for the other young man, there was no way he could have known. And that's where this story ends. Thank you for listening. Good evening, I'm writing to share a story that happened to my father. He gave me permission to tell it because I believe it's a very interesting story that deserves to be heard by more people. My father's name is Noah Reed. He spent his entire life as a truck driver, so as you can imagine, he has an endless number of stories. This one happened years ago, when I was still a child, back in 2011. He says he was on his way back home after delivering merchandise to a border city. He left for the highway at midnight because he much preferred driving at night than during the day. He was driving as usual and chatting over the radio with a friend who was also working that night, though in another part of the state. They were simply talking, something they enjoyed doing to pass the time, make the trip more pleasant, and avoid falling asleep if they were tired. But suddenly, interference started on the radio. My father could no longer hear his friend clearly. This struck him as strange because in that area there was always good signal. He was close to a small town, so he didn't understand what was happening until he completely lost communication with his friend. Then, out of nowhere, a woman's voice began to come through the radio. At first, it was impossible to understand because of the heavy interference, but he says he was immediately struck by how much it sounded like his mother's voice, my grandmother. He answered, asking who was speaking, because it was impossible for my grandmother to be talking to him through the radio. It didn't make any sense. The hair on his arm stood on end when he heard, "Son." After that, there was more interference, and no matter how much he replied, he couldn't make out what she was saying, until, for a brief moment, the static cleared, and he distinctly heard my grandmother say, "Don't go through kilometer 6, take a detour." My father was completely confused. He couldn't understand how my grandmother could have called him on a radio, nor why she was telling him that. He kept asking over the radio, but the communication was suddenly lost altogether. He tried calling her house on his phone, but no one answered. My grandmother lived alone, but even so, he thought it strange that she didn't pick up. So, my father decided to listen to her. He took a detour around that stretch of road she had warned him about. Once past that kilometer, he got back on the highway and decided to call my mother to ask her to go to my grandmother's house and check on her, because he was feeling uneasy. My mother went there in the middle of the night, knocked many times, but no one answered. She used the spare key my father had given her and went inside immediately. She found my grandmother lying on the floor. She was already cold. She had been dead for hours after suffering a heart attack. My mother had to call my father to tell him what had happened, because he wouldn't stop calling her to ask how his mom was. My father says it was the hardest blow of his life, and he still doesn't know how he managed to drive all the way home that night. Paramedics told my mother that my grandmother had been dead for more than 8 hours, that she had passed away during the day from natural causes. My father was devastated, but also astonished. His mother had somehow found a way to communicate with him after her death, even though he still didn't understand why she had made him avoid that specific kilometer. The next day, a news report came out saying that the night before, at that exact kilometer, a criminal group had been stopping buses and trucks, forcing passengers off, and no one knew what had happened to them. That's when my father understood my grandmother had wanted to protect him. She had found a way to warn him, to keep him safe, even after death. I know it's an incredible story. When I grew up, my father told me this experience. At first, I was scared, but now, instead of fear, I feel tenderness for what my grandmother did for him. And even though I didn't spend much time with her because I was very young when she passed away, I remember her with great affection. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our story. Good night.